This is Diamond D with where I'm giving you some love advice, some happiness advice, some everyday good advice to make your day a little more loving.
Hi, I'm Diamond D with Love and Happiness, where I'm giving you some love advice, some happiness advice, some everyday good advice to make your day a little more loving. Our guest today is Gregory Wardlow Jr. Mr. Wardlow is a native of Illinois. He served 5 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, and that service has brought him to the Washington, D.C. area. He attended Washington Bible College and is a graduate of Lancaster Bible College, where he earned a Bachelor's of Art in Biblical Studies. He earned his Master's of Divinity in Theological Studies from Liberty University. Mr. Wardlow has served in many ministry capacities for over 17 years, including teaching, small group leader, outreach coordinator, and pastoring. He was ordained an elder in 2013. In June 2018, Mr. Wardlow became the co-pastor of Bradburn Memorial Bible Church, now known as the Lighthouse on the Pike. And after the retirement of Pastor Dennis, he became the senior pastor in January of 2019. Mr. Wardlow is also an admissions advisor for Capital Seminary Graduate School and is an adjunct professor for Lancaster Bible College in Maryland. Gregory is married to Nate Wardlow, and they currently reside in Maryland with their dog Ziggy. Thank you, Mr. Wardlow, for being on the show today. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
All right, Mr. Wardlow. First of all, I want to first say from both of us, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you too.
Yeah. So how you feel about like your year so far? I know it just started like a couple of weeks ago. What's your feeling compared to last year going into?
I think the difference is the only difference between this year and last year is that this year is starting off crazy. So I think we pretty much know what to expect, or we can't have some expectations. Versus last year, we were completely blindsided by everything. So for me, this year is just continuing from last year, except for last year, I think we were blindsided. Oh, and by the way, you all can call me Greg, please. The Mr. Wardlow made me feel old.
Okay. All right. Gotcha, Greg. Okay. So what's it like taking over for a pastor like Paul Dennis, who was like the longest tenured pastor at the Lighthouse on the Pike Church, and stepping in for him?
Um, I don't know what my feelings are concerning that. It was something. The church itself was not something that was on my radar. It was not something that I was expecting, even though I had been making moves already that was preparing me for that. It's just the way that this particular church came about. It's traditionally it's been an all Caucasian church. However, it's in an urban Black neighborhood in Prince George's County. It's just that in the 1950s, it used to be an all white neighborhood. And over the years, the churches just as whites moved out and Blacks moved into the area, they've just been this building that's there that I've probably driven past a million times and I've never blinked at it. Never seen anybody come out of the building, and it was these about seven or 10 elderly white members. And Paul, who I took over for, had been there. He had pastored for 30 years, but he's 64. He had been attending there since he was 10. Make a long story short, they ended up calling the school, which where I work at, and that's how we met. And after a couple of times of going over there, they asked me to co-pastor. And then initially he retired. Like 6 months later, they turned the church over to me. And when he left, the elderly white members left as well. And here it is, it's this property that's paid for. These people who 8 months ago, prior to that, we had never even passed each other. They gave me this property and they walked away from it, and I've never seen them since. So it's a fresh air, if you will, kind of like going through, and now the community is starting to recognize who we are by doing some outreach projects. But everybody says the same thing I said. A, I never saw anybody come out of this building before. And B, for people who have been in the neighborhood for some time, the first thing they say, well, isn't this a white church? So we're kind of like in the process, and COVID didn't help at all with this year. So we're in the process of refacing, rebranding. That's how we got the name, the Lighthouse on the Pike. The church is actually on Marlboro Pike, so I thought it was fitting for what we're trying to do. And I guess I didn't ask how I feel, but that's the story behind it.
Okay, shoot, it works. Trust me. We got an idea of how you felt. Speaking of that, I know you mentioned COVID. So how's everything evolving, social distancing in terms of doing church services or just working within the church at this time? Like, what are the major adjustments? Because I know everybody have to adjust, but now being a year almost into it, have things gotten a little better in terms of the adjustments, or just been a major turnover?
I think if I was to say things are getting better or have gotten better, it's only because we've become, like everyone else at this particular point, have become accustomed to this new norm for all of us. But it's actually created more work, if you will, because there's less people around. So I've had to learn how to do a whole lot of stuff that I had not knew how to do. And COVID hit, we had only been a year old at that point. So even though there were some things on the list, like we need to get audiovisual ministry up, we need to get an online presence and social media. Those were things that I was planning on doing, but I had to do it immediately. So I had to buy equipment. I've learned how to become a video editor at this point, which I enjoyed doing, but I had that wasn't my skill set prior to then. So I've had to learn how to put on some other hats that I wasn't planning on doing, that I would have loved for someone else to do that job. So it's become more work in that regard. And then two, which I think is probably equally important and maybe even more, I think everybody is pretty much over with the social distancing, even though it's something that we need to do, and I do practice it, but we were created to be communal. We're supposed to be a community of people. And I think initially, I certainly didn't think that we would still be in a situation almost a year later. I kind of thought it was something that was just going to brush over. It'd be a couple of weeks, if that long, and we'll be back to our regular scheduled program. But I think at this point, there is a serious disconnect amongst the members, and even sometimes myself. I think society as a whole, because we've been kind of forced to be separate, and that affects everybody differently. But it's made things a little bit harder, even though we've gotten used to it, because it's kind of harder to gauge people. Sometimes I can get a feel for you by looking you in the eye, and social media and technology and all those things allows us to hide a little bit. More, and it's also, I think overall, it's just made everybody feel secluded, which isn't always the best thing either. So I'm right in the middle with how I feel about it. We're making it work, but of course, looking forward to the day where we can just go out to a restaurant and fellowship at church and do everything else that we would have normally been doing.
Okay, definitely. Speaking of that, you have interesting journeys, my friend, in terms of, coming from the Marines to now embarking in the path of worship and preaching the word of God. Can you elaborate more on that in terms of your journey as coming from the Marines and now, basically, you're a pastor now?
Yeah. Man, you couldn't have paid me all the money in the world if we were just to go back some 25 years or so, somewhere around that. I think I got saved in 2002 or something like that. So actually it's been about 19 years. This definitely was not my idea of where I would be in life. I always had ambitions of being some type of superstar or something. And just being from Chicago, I grew up, I'm a 70s baby. So I grew up at a time where the church was still a part of our community. I am by no means, I was not a church kid. We went to church on Easter like everybody else. But I grew up in a time where you still knew the local pastors because they lived in your neighborhood. I remember they used to have revivals at the park across the street from my grandma. So I've always, and as most of us as Blacks, we grew up today's time is a little bit different, but if you grew up in the 70s or in the 80s, church or Christianity was just a part of our culture. Grandmother had the big white Bible in the living room that you couldn't touch. I remember her cooking, listening to, her church music and whatever pastors. But still, that was not my dream. But God's plan ultimately prevailed. And from Chicago, I graduated high school in '93. A week later, I was on an airplane to California to Marine Corps boot camp, and I was just having the time of my life. I'm seeing the world, meeting new people. It ain't a city I haven't been to that I ain't partying. And that's just the life that I live. And in my mind, I was just gonna die doing that. But God called me out of that. Shorter version of a longer story. I ended up hooking up with a young lady. Her parents were pastors. Somewhere along the line, I ended up at the church, walked up with my hands in the air, and 19 years later, here I am. But that translated from me, matriculated from me being in the Marine Corps, me meeting different people, taking education seriously again, wanting to go back to school. So I think I went back to school at 32, 33, ended up with my bachelor's degree in biblical studies, did my master's at Liberty, which is how I met in Israel of all places. Uh, and I mean, here we are today. It's been a great ride. All of it, I mean, even with the church 2 years ago, finally got married 3 years ago. I mean, none of this stuff was ever in my plan. I was just going to be a bachelor and just party for life. And here we are.
Hey, awesome. You're partying for God for life. So there you
Yeah,
go.
yeah. That's a different party. That's all.
Yes, sir. Speaking of the Marines, do you feel like in terms of your experience in the Marines has helped you in any way in terms of like being able to be head of a church now? Has any of those qualities that you've learned as a Marine come into play at any point psychologically or just in general?
Yeah, man. I am. That was one of the best choices that I've ever made in life. Uh, it's a part of who I am. So there's some things that I just do that I don't even think about that I know came from that culture from the Marine Corps. So I'm a take charge type of guy, if you will. In most cases, if it's something I'm committed to, man, I'll jump out of the airplane and figure out how I'm gonna land later. And which has worked for me in a lot of ways, and it has worked against me. But I say that to say, like, I'm that way in everything that I do, and especially when it comes to ministry. Like, I'm like, let's go get it. Where some people are more planners, which is needed too. Like I don't like a whole lot of details. Tell me what you need done, and I'm about to go figure it out. Like while I'm doing it, and I'm trying. And now that I'm a little bit older, I'm trying to uh, reel some of that in because again, I figured out that it does work for me, but it has been times where it has worked against me, and now where there's other people that depend on me constantly. Sometimes I can't always do that in leading people without giving them where I don't like a whole lot of details. I want to know what you need done. But I'm also learning that now when it comes to leading people, that does work in a lot of instances, but also people need to be nurtured a little bit, which now causes me to slow down and explain things because in most cases, because I think that way, I'll just tell you what I want done, and then I expect for everybody else to do it, and kind of expect for them to think the way or do it the way that I would do it. And I think that's an unrealistic expectation for me to them because they don't know what I'm thinking. So I'm learning. I'm learning. I'm in the process of learning of now reacting to people that way. So it has its pros and its cons, but again, just as far as me being independent, thinking for myself, being willing again just to go do it. That's me all day. And those are some of the major takeaways that that's been instilled in me today that came from the Marine Corps.
Okay. Wow, that's powerful. That's deep. Okay. Being a student, it's like we all have a degree in terms of like what you do, and now being in that profession, what would you tell an upcoming pastor or potential person in the church, the process in terms of staying focused into your studies, in terms of understanding the Bible and everything that goes along with it, and in this path? Like, any advice do you give to a young college student right now that's embarking in that journey?
Yeah, and I don't mean to, what I'm getting ready to say, I really don't mean for it to sound cliche-ish, but it's just a matter of trusting God and trusting him in the process, because I think most people will admit to the fact that they have faith, and I think at its surface, I agree. Most of us do have faith, meaning that we believe in something. So, in regards to Christianity, in that regard, like, yeah, so we believe. I grew up around or in that environment where I've always believed that there is a God, or there. So, with that being said, but when we look at faith, and we look at it for what it truly means, it's a three-part meaning that far surpasses belief. It's to rely on and commit to. So belief is just the first part of it. So to believe in God is great. But then there's a commitment component to it. Well, I believe you. So now I'm committed to you in this process. And once we learn how to embrace that, and now I'm committed, now there's a part where now I have to rely on you for everything. And this is faith that is at its rawest point, which is why we can even see in the Bible where sometimes Jesus not only rebuked the people, but he will rebuke the disciples for something they had done at one point, and then they couldn't do it another time, and they would come to him and say, like, well, hey, how come we couldn't do it? And he would look at them and say the same thing that he said to everybody else. He said, because of your lack of belief. Where, again, I think we can all agree that, yeah, we believe in him. But when we start talking about commitment for the long term, for the long haul, that's a challenge. And then now getting to the point where I literally rely on you for every single thing, where I'm no longer like relying on my own ability and my own wisdom and other people and other things. Like, man, that never ends. It never ever ends. I say that to say that there, I believe, is the formula. And it looks different for everybody because we all don't necessarily face the same challenges. We all, come from, we may have some similarity in our backgrounds, but we all come from different backgrounds. And all of those things that we come into this before, it shapes our ideology on how we think about everything. So whether it's school, whether it's church, whether it's relationships with other people, we bring in all of that baggage, and now we're supposed to be, Christians in that regard, and still doing these other things, and it's still that same process. And I say that to any new pastor, any old pastor, any new Christian, any old Christian, the process never goes away. So I'm still going through the process. I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to depend on him, and then I'm still learning to commit myself more, and so which makes me believe in him more, and then it starts to cycle all over again. It's a continuing process, and once we stop the process at any level or at any point in our life, is most of the times where we find ourselves where we stumbled or got jacked up, and we got to do the process all over again, right? Because it never changes. The formula never ever changes.
Okay, that's facts. The formula never changes. That's with anybody with a certain blueprint. I feel in life, if you think it's what it's going to be. You just have to follow yourself and follow God, and you'll make it. One question that I have, in terms of, I was listening to a podcast that you was on. It was talking about revitalizing churches in your area,
Oh wow.
struggling like financially. Can you elaborate more on that? And if there anything someone outside of a church can do in terms of like helping a church or noticing the signs of a church that are struggling financially, if any way you could reach out to help in any shape or form?
Yeah. So here's the thing. A church is a nonprofit. They have a 501c3 status with the IRS, which means that the church itself isn't selling anything, even though sometimes it seems like it. We're talking to, but we don't make a profit. So the church only survives off of donations, if you will, from people. And typically, any church, the majority of their donations come from their members. Now, there are people who will make donations or contributions or whatever from other places, but the majority of any church, whether you have a mega church or you have a small church, the majority of their money comes from their members. So when you, in that podcast, when we were talking about the revitalization of churches, it's typically talking about churches who are dying because the membership over the years has declined. Case in point, like the church that I took over, back in their heyday, they were thriving. Now, when I took over, they had less than 10 members, and they all were elderly. So with that being said, it's a two-part process. In most cases, from leadership of the church to the members, it becomes a pride issue where they don't necessarily reach out to other organizations and other churches to help them out. And especially in our community, it's all pride, because we never want someone else to think that we're less than them. I don't know where we got that idea from. So we'll sit here and struggle and won't say nothing, won't reach out. So that's one part. But the other part of it is, as far as people who are not necessarily involved with the church, they can make a donation to anywhere or any church at any time. I think most people, well, not most people kind of will if the word gets out. And I think that kind of falls, the burden of responsibility falls on those churches too, because a lot of them are not necessarily involved in their immediate communities. So I think that I would say that if there's anybody who's listening to this that would like to donate to any church, if they see a church in their neighborhood, especially during these times of the pandemic, the average church across America is only about 81 members. And I know we live in a time of mega churches, so we think that all churches are, but the average church across America only have about 81 members. And that's a functioning church. The local community neighborhood churches probably are less than that. So anybody that's listening to this that would like to help out in that particular cause, I would ask them to find a church in their neighborhood and adopt one of those churches, make a phone call, reach out, visit and attend, and just ask the question like, hey, how can we help you out? Especially if financially you can do that. And sometimes it's about finding out, some other programs that you might want to see in your community that it's easier to do through the church, because the church is a 501c3. So there's things that they can do that can get, other funding and things like that, that you can help sponsor them or help them out doing that. And that would be a great way to help out churches. But I think, at some point we have to get over ourselves and start, bridging the gap and having those conversations with one another. I think just as a society, man, we've just become so closed in to, within our four walls at home or in our churches or anything. And, those days in the 80s where like the whole neighborhood knew each other is like a thing of the past almost now.
Gotcha. All right. Hopefully, well, I'm sure people that are listening will do their part and be able to be helpful in that. Also, in terms of the African American youth, do you have any programs in terms of your church involving, like helping out more the African American youth community?
So currently, I don't have any programs that's up and running. Like
Okay.
I said, when COVID hit, we were a year old at that particular point. So these were things and discussions that we were having, meeting with some of the local community board members and things of that nature to find out what the need is and how we can assist in that. So unfortunately, no, I do not have any up and running thing that we've been consistently doing for the last 2 months is we've partnered with the group called Project Bridges, where
Okay.
we're actually providing, we give out free food every Friday to our community because there's an alarming number of food deserts, unfortunately, in a lot of our neighborhoods. And food deserts, for people who don't know what that term means, there's a lack of adequate grocery stores within certain mile radiuses in a lot of our neighborhoods. So they consider those spots food deserts. And then even in those areas where there are some grocery stores, there's an alarming rate of hunger that takes place with people that just can't afford it. So the Lord has put us in a position where, again, we give out free food every Friday that comes from one of the groups that we partner with. So, I mean, just like today alone, we gave out 160 boxes of food. And that's pretty much every week. The week of Christmas, I think we gave out about 3,000 pounds of food. So that's a program that I will do my best to always keep going on. And once schools open back up, we'll probably adopt one of the elementary schools in the neighborhood because, there's a lot of kids that go to school every day that's hungry. And that was one of the alarming things that took place when the pandemic started too. Now that the schools were closed, they realized that, hey, this is the only place where a lot of these kids get at least 2 meals a day. So that's one of the things that I will continue in our community in that regard, to try to offset some of the costs for people that can't afford groceries or people who can't eat at all. At some point, we're looking at having some type of a food kitchen pantry at the church. And then some of those other programs and things we are looking at, we were planning on doing like a job readiness, if you will, and things like that for some of our young youth, teach them interview skills, how to properly dress for an interview. We had designated some spots to take in clothes donations and stuff to teach the young fellas how to tie a tie, and some of the ladies to teach some of the young girls how to sit properly, and which me being slouched over right now isn't helping. But just things like that. I think that for me, it's one of those things that there's some basic things that we can do that I think will carry a long, long way. If I teach a young guy how to tie a tie, man, that's something he'll remember how to do when he's in his 40s and 50s. Somebody taught me how to tie one when I was a teenager, and I still do it now. So.
Well, it does look like we're out of time. So tell the viewers how we can get in contact with you.
Wow. So you can get in contact with me. So the name of our church is the Lighthouse on the Pike. On Facebook, we're the Lighthouse on the Pike Church, and likewise on Instagram, we're the Lighthouse on the Pike. Me, myself, on Instagram, I'm Just Greg, JSTGREG, and then that's on Instagram, I'm Just Greg, and then on Facebook, I'm Gregory Wardlow, and our church website is thelighthouseonthepike.org. So that's if you're looking for me, you can find me through all of those outlets. Or if you want more information about the church, you can find it there too.
Awesome. So that leaves me with the quote for our viewers, and it's going to come from Jimi Hendrix. It says, "When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace." Thank you all for watching Love and Happiness with Diamond D. And let me remind you that God loves you.